All right, welcome back. This is Kevin McCain with Idaho Art Classes and Kevin McCain Studios. And this is for people that are just getting started with painting. So I've made some videos where we talk about color. We talk about doing some black and white painting. We talked about color mixing and color matching and techniques and all this good stuff. And now we're going to take the techniques and we're going to actually make a painting with it. So the first thing I'm going to do, and again for the brushes I've got a 3/4 inch brush, I've got a 1-inch brush, and I've got a 10-inch brush, and if I need to, I'll use this little number 5. So these are the brushes I'm going to be using. The number 5 is optional. I don't even know if I'll use this. It's just in case. Again, this will be my number 10 round, 1-inch flat, and I have a 3/4 inch flat as well. Do I have to have the 3/4 inch flat? No, I could use, the 1-inch flat and use that. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll just go ahead and use these two, since these are the two most versatile brushes. And the first thing is we're going to glaze the background. So I went ahead now, and I'm going to send, for those in the class, I'm going to send you a photograph. Well, we simplified the photograph. We're putting it on, there's a little, and you'll see this as I begin to paint this, but this is basically a little pear with a line, and that line means flat table versus the backdrop, or where the wall is. So that's what we're going to be painting with this. We're going to be painting that, again, that's sort of the back wall. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to go ahead now. With the wall, there's some light, and then the light transitions, getting darker and slightly darker and darker. I can pick any value I want. So sometimes people are like, well, it's my creative prerogative, And so even though the light's right here and very light, I might pick over here where it's going a little bit we're moving a little bit into halftone or middle value, and I might use that to be over here because it will be darker than my pear and give it more punch. That's creative prerogative, and artists will do that a lot, where they'll take something and they're going to throw it in there. And unfortunately, not enough of them tell you what it is they've just done. So that's what I'm going to do with this. I'm already thinking, all right, we're going to darken this a little bit so my yellow pear will have a little bit more punch. I'm going to start off by the back of the wall is sort of an antique white. It's not quite an ivory, but it's got some warmth to it, and it's sort of neutral. This is just burnt umber to that orange I just mixed up, which was a little yellow. It was basically this yellow ochre and this red to sort of dull it out. And then I add the brown to it, but like, oh, that's just brown. Well, we need to neutralize it more, so I'm going to add a little bit of the Payne's Gray. Now, the Payne's Gray is going to be a little softer. If I wanted to, I could say, well, and we'll add blue. Well, that's another way of doing it, because the Payne's Gray we use is a dark, dark, dark blue. It's just that this blue is going to have a little more intensity, and it's going to push this mixture around a little bit more. But we're going to go ahead and mix up a nice neutral wash. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to use this wash. And I'm going to look up here. It seems like there's a little bit, just a tiny bit of blue-green to this. So I can add just a little bit of that blue-green to it. I don't want too much of that because I do want this, where the light is, to have some warmth to it. I think it's way too dark. So I'm going to start off with a much lighter, a really watery wash, as some people like to say. And we're going to come over here and we're going to cut in around this pear with this wash. So we're going to go ahead and I can't get in there, so I grabbed my number 10, and we're going to use the number 10. So we're going to bring this in here. So I can switch between a flat and a round. And again, the round I'm going to use to cut in around this pear. Now I've only got 10 minutes to do this, tops. So I have got to move it. I have no luxury of time. This is watercolor and the clock is ticking. And you can't leave any one area like I just put a stroke over that because it was starting to create a water line. So you got to be careful. Again, yeah, you're battling the clock. And so, again, I'm cutting it around this pear using my brush and a bit of water. Again, I wouldn't want to leave that too long because it'll start to create a water line. So when I say, you know, I've got 10 minutes, and that's on the long side. I need to get this cut in as quickly as I possibly can. Otherwise, I'm gonna have a problem. Okay. So again, we're very, very, very neutral. Now I'm gonna start bringing a little more color in here. And so I think I can. We're gonna take a little bit more of that yellow, tiny bit of that red. So we got an orange. We're gonna mix it into here, which is gonna make it, you know, duller or grayer. And then we're gonna bring this in here as we're continuing to, whoops, that's creating a water line. Need to wet that down. And again, we're gonna go ahead and bring just a little bit of orange into this wall so that we have a little higher chroma. What we've also done is by doing this, we now have wet the whole area. And so this would be the time if I want to you know, make more of a gradation, well then I'd have to, you know, go in over here and do that. Now would be the time to do it. And I think I might do some of that. I'm going to get some of this, go to the bluer side, and I'm going to drop just a little bit of a blue-green into this. I'm using sort of a semi-wet brush, and it's going into a wet area. Okay, and I'm just dropping it in there and I'm letting it diffuse. And so all I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get a little bit of a little cooler side versus a little warmer side. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead for now. We're going to let this dry and we're going to come back and we're going to reduce some more on it. Now I just realized I don't have the lights on my subject and we don't have our photo lights on. So when we come back, we'll have those on. It's going to change the temperature a little bit of this, but we'll be back in just a bit. All right, welcome back. So we've turned the lights on a little bit. Again, it's changed a little bit of the temperature, you know, the colors a little bit because we've got the daylight, balanced light on these guys. We're going to go ahead and we're going to glaze the cast shadow here a bit. Okay, so when we're working in watercolor, we work in layers. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with the lighter side. You know, we've got no more, you don't want to spend any more than 10 minutes in any one area. Well, this is such a small area, I should be able to do this in 5. So again, you want to work at a nice pace as quickly as, again, you possibly can. Now again, I'm going to use this as my wash. So I'm wetting the paper down, but I'm using color to do it. And so this right here will be the wetting down of the paper. Now, if I want to soften an edge, I might have let this go too long. Let's see, I can go ahead and soften this if I haven't waited too long. Stroke with pure water, and that will give it a little bit to sort of spread. If you stroke it and it doesn't spread, well, that means, again, we waited too long. Let's see if I can pick this up just a bit along that edge. I'm going to see if I can do the same thing over here. Now, it's pushing in there. That's called a bloom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to re-wet the entire area. Okay. So when people first start painting, a lot of times they have a hard time controlling blooms. And what blooms are, it looks like a little flower when it happens, because what happens is that the water tension starts pushing the pigment around. and it starts to spread, and it starts to look like a little, like a little flower, daffodil or something like that. And so whenever that starts to happen, now that's why you want to be very careful before you go into any one place. You don't want to, if your brush is too wet, that's why we use our paper towel to control the moisture in here. So if I go into an area that's mostly dry, which is what had happened, and you put down too wet of a brush, you'll get a bloom. And so if that what I say is like, oh, well, I need to wet that back down. That's true. While I'm trying to rough this in and keep it wet, because that's where you have the most control. And what happens is that people in watercolor love to use the word overworked. Oh, you overworked it. It's overworked. Nope. Overworked. And you hear that over and over and over again. And there's so many different ways you could apply it. But the biggest thing is that people will keep working in an area that needs to be left alone. So that's why I'm talking about, oh, I've got 5 minutes. Oh, I've got this many minutes. Oh, I've got to, got to get out. You'll hear me, I got to get off of there. It's time's up. And you really do have to be careful, because again, if you put an area and make it much wetter than what it should be, you're going to get blooms. You're going to get, but if you, like I'm drawing this out to be almost, this is almost a thirsty brush. It's even a little drier than a dry brush. And that way I'm not even hardly adding any moisture whatsoever. But this is still wet enough that we can then add a little bit more paint to get a gradation. Okay. Okay. So I'm getting just a little bit of a gradation happening with this painting. Now when you're painting, you're going to be doing something called babysitting. Babysitting edges. And that's too wet. So let me make that a thirsty brush and pull some of that back off. Okay. Let's see if I can. I've got very little water in this brush. See if I can. Nope, it's not going to do it. So I'm going to have to wait till this gets a little bit drier before I try that. Maybe I'll let it dry out entirely, because I feel like I've been sort of pushing my luck on this one, because I'm right about at that amount of time where I need to leave it alone. So again, watercolor, a lighter touch is better. If you think, hey, I should get off there, get off of there. You can always come back and re-wet the whole area, put another wash in. But once you start getting blooms out of things, it's hard to not just mess the whole thing up. So you want to be careful of that. I can also use this to pick up paint. Press this down, so I've got this edge that's bled out, to where I tried to use this to soften the edge. And I want to see if I can just use a little bit of moisture and soften the edge up just a scotch. Okay. Okay, and I think it did. So again, we're going to go ahead and let this dry a little bit. Now this is almost dry brushing. So again, if I'm dry brushing and if my brush is drier than the area I'm going into, it'll be fine. But if it's wetter, that's when you get those little blooms, little spreads starting to happen. So what we're going to do is we're going to let this dry. We're going to come back and we're going to deal with the pear. All right. All right, welcome back. This is Kevin McCain with Idaho Art Classes in Kevin McCain Studios. And again, we can see that this is not white. That we put this right next to it. This has a value to it. And that's what we want. We can always darken watercolor. It's much tougher to make watercolor lighter, so better to be too light than too dark in watercolor by far. So we're going to go ahead and deal with this, the pear part of this. And I could darken this if I needed to, but we're not going to do it right now. We don't want to, if you touch any area that's wet against another area that's wet, it'll bleed over into it. So that's why I let this dry down a little bit. And you're going to want a piece of stretched paper. This is not stretched. It claims to be 300-pound paper, but it was out of a block, and so it's acting more like 140 pounds, so it's trying to buckle a little bit. You're going to want your paper to be stretched with paper tape and or stapled down. Blocks really don't work all that well, and so but I thought this would be heavy enough that we could use it, and it's just a little light. I would have to stretch this out using paper tape to get a nice good stretch, so that when you wet it, it won't do this. Because if you got your paper doing this, your water is going to settle down in there and you're going to get dark spots and light spots because of the hills and valleys. And we don't want the hills and valleys. We don't want to make things harder. We want to make it easier. And that's why we stretch paper. And I've heard some people like, oh, you don't stretch paper anymore, you just get a block. No, you don't. I mean, you can get a block. Don't get me wrong. Yeah, you can go get a block. But blocks still will bend. They'll still do this. They'll still warp. They're not a really tight stretch. It's not as tight a stretch as having actual paper tape and stretching that thing out. That will give you a beautiful stretch where you don't have to worry about anything. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and mix up. We're going to mix up 4 different puddles on for our pear. We're going to mix up the light yellow. So that's sort of going to be our medium yellow. This will be our light yellow. We're then going to have our middle value. So we're going to darken the yellow with a little bit of the burnt umber and a little bit of the yellow ochre. And I think we're going to maybe just put a little bit of coolness in here. Now, if I'm using blue-green, but if I or a green that's really blue, but if I needed it even bluer, I could add this blue-green again. Keep it the one that's closest to the hue you're trying to shoot for. There we go. That'll be a little darker. Now I need to tame some of the intensity, so we're going to take a little bit of brown, and I can also take a little bit of Payne's gray, and that will neutralize it much more quickly for my dark middle value yellow. And then we're going to go into the shadows. So for the shadows, we're going to get it darker still. So we're going to say, all right, we're going to put some of this. I'm going to put some of this. Now, remember we had between green, because green has yellow in it, and this is actually a sap green, so it's got more yellow, and burnt umber, between those two colors is yellow. So again, I could take some of this. Looks like that's a little too green. I'm going to grab some of my, I could use orange, add it to this. I could use the burnt umber and add to this. This will pull it out of the greens a little bit more. And then we're going to go to the darkest color. And with green again, but there's a time at which we can no longer use yellow. We have to use between burnt umber and sap green, or in other words, a yellow green. And I could mix up a nice yellow, a nice blue green, and get a really bright green, you know, again, and add that to my burnt umber. So, you know, if I'm using a green that I already have, but if I didn't have that, what would I do? Well, no problem. We'd say, first off, we want the brightest green we can get. Well, that's a yellow green plus a blue green. This is a phthalo blue. That will get you as bright a green as you could possibly stand to have. Again, we could add a little bit of this yellow to it, so it's a little darker yellow than that yellow. Again, so we're going to get a little darker. You're going to sacrifice, because it has more warmth, a little further away from green, so we're going to sacrifice a little bit of the intensity, but we'll darken it. And then we could use this between that and the brown, and again you'll get a darkened yellow. Now again, this if I need to go darker than that, I'd have to add Payne's gray to it. And this is another way of doing a green. We can take Payne's gray, which has a little bit of blue, and then we could add that to a yellow for the green part. I want more yellow. This is too blue green, so I could add more and more of the yellow to that, and so that I have more of a yellow green. I gotta be careful when I dip into that yellow because it'll lighten this color, and it did. It lightened it by a couple steps. And the reason I was just trying to get some more yellow in there, and then I could add between this and again and the brown, and again that will give me a darker yellow. Okay, so these are my various mixtures. Now some people will be like, oh, I'm just going to start with yellow, I'm going to start just, throwing it down. And that's fine, but I like a little more, because again, we got 10 minutes to do this, and then we need to leave it alone. If you're like, what if I'm not there, if I'm not done? Let it alone, leave it alone. Let it dry, re-wet it, put a second layer on. So better to do it in like 3 layers to get it to finally what you want than to do it in 1 layer and overwork it, because it'll always be it'll just be terrible. It will not be what you want, and you'll wish you had left it alone, because it'll start to look just terrible. So and again, like I said, people like to use the word overworked. Personally, I think they overuse the word overworked, but there is something to that. You don't want to make it go over and over and over and over and over until you destroy the picture. That's not what we're looking for. I'm going to grab a bigger brush. It's better to have a bigger brush than a smaller brush. So I was looking at this, I'm like, man, this is just not doing what I want. This has a lot of green to it, so let me see if I can get the green out of this brush, and maybe I need to put some of this yellow in there to get some of that green out and then pull this out. So again, I'm trying to, and I need to, now this is starting to create a water line, so I'm going to need to go over here and wet it down. Again, see how that's stained the paper? Once you've done that, there's very few ways to get that out. I mean, yes, I could use a bleach solution, and there are some very extreme measures we could take. I could hit it with some a Brillo pad. I could use a orbital sander on it if I want to get really aggressive, but that's I wouldn't start out that way, and that would be a little bit much for what we're doing as well. So we're gonna I re-wet this whole area so that now I can actually come back in here and start to, I think I blew out the highlight. I can either try to see if I can pull the highlight back off and try to reestablish it, or I could come back later with an eraser, or I could come back in with something abrasive or something, or I've got some some recourse, if you will, but better to remember it and leave it white. That's the best way to do it. Now, if you forget it, that doesn't mean, oh, now it's over. Nope, you got options. The big thing with watercolor is learning to roll with the punches, as some people might say. Learn to deal with less than ideal, because it's gonna happen. You're like, oh, I wish I woulda, and instead of going, oh, okay, next piece of paper, you just learn, okay, well, here's the options I've got. I can do A, B, C, or D, and then you'll just go ahead and do A, B, C, or D. Or maybe all three, it just depends on what your options are and what you think would be best, and so forth and so on. So we've got a light value, we've got a middle value. We're going to get a little bit darker middle value here. So we're going to come down here a little bit more into our middle values, or as this is going to go into the shadows. So this will be our darker middle value right through here. Okay, I'm not going to worry quite so much about this little golden part at the top. We're going to leave that for now. From here, we're actually going to go into some of the shadow. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to bring in some of these shadow colors. Okay. All right. I wish this had a little bit more blue to it. So in other words, a little bit of the green. So we're going to bring some of this in here. Now another thing to understand with watercolor is the fact that you have to have it darker than what you think it's going to need to be. And there's an old adage in watercolor that if it's the color you want when it's wet, it won't be the color you want when it's dry, because watercolor gets lighter as it dries, and it gets substantially lighter in some cases. So you're going to want to, I always have a towel here to be able to control some of the how dry my brush is. That's what you're going to use that for. Again, I can come over here and I'm looking to darken some of this. Again, we're going to want to look at the form shadows. Is it a dark tone? Is it a light tone? Is it reflected light? We want some of that going on with this. That was maybe a bit much, but it's okay. We're going to bring some more of, just a little bit of this in here. So we're going to use this green in here, and the reason we're using green is because the shadow goes a little bluer, and so your yellows, if you're going a little bluer, there's going to be some green in the shadows. It's not going to be bright green. It's going to be very much a yellow green. But again, we have to give a nod to the fact that that's happening. It's something that is going to happen. It's something that should happen. We've got a warm light. We've got a cool shadow. This is what's going to happen to our pear. We need just a little bit darker in a couple places. So again, there's a whole idea of if it's the color I want when it's wet, it won't be the color I want when it's dry. So I'll go ahead and darken for the core shadow. Okay, there's some reflected light here, but then it gets darker again, so the reflected light fades. So we're going to go ahead and try to make a little bit of a transition here through that reflected light. Drop a little bit in here too. I'm still looking at that 10 minutes. We're getting close. This reflected light starts to pick back up as it goes up onto the ball up here. We're taking in between the burnt umber. Put this up here. See if there's a couple places where we can a little bit of a core shadow through here, a little darker. Okay, I'm going to grab my brush here. I'm going to make this a thirsty brush, and we're going to pull. So there's some reflected light here on the edge, and by making a thirsty brush, it'll pull paint back off. So I can pull some of that paint back off, and I'm going to see, hey, does it need to be pulled off some more? I'm actually cleaning up the edge a little bit. I think there's a bit where it does need to come right through here. There needs to be just a little bit of that reflected light, so I pulled it off. Again, it looks like a little J hook, and some of the color is going to flow back in there. And then there's some up here. We're going to look at that. We'll look down here. There's also a little bit of a reflected light right here. Using a thirsty brush, again, it will pull some of that color back off. And then the paint will flow back into it. Now, that was too dry. I was trying to do something. I was trying to put some paint on the other side of that right here. Okay, the paint's no longer flowing. Okay, that means I need to get off this thing. So, better to let this alone and then come back and do some more on it. I just said that, and yet I think I'm going to try one last thing. This is usually where you get into trouble, where you're like, I should leave it alone. Oh no, you know what? I'm going to try one last thing. That's when you get blooms, and this is Probably not the best idea I've had today, but I'm going to see if I can just get away with just a little bit more of the middle value coming around here. It's a little dry though. I'm really a little worried about this. It's probably going to bloom. Then I'm going to come back here and we're going to darken it just a little bit more. It gets a little warmer too, so we're going to put a little bit more yellow in there. I'm going to go ahead and make a little bit of a thirsty brush. That off of there. See if I can pull this out just a little bit. This right here is a little too circular for me, but it'll work. So again, I'm going to leave that alone. We're gonna let that dry a bit. The one thing I probably can do, I can use my little number 10 round. I'm going to glaze in a little bit for the. And again, with watercolor, we go darker. So you're going to start off lighter and then go darker. So I'm going to go ahead and make a little bit of orange. Then I'm going to glaze parts of this stem with just a little bit of orange. And this orange is going to get a little bit darker. I'm going to leave some of that alone, but there's other parts that are going to go darker. So meaning that when it's dry, some of it's going to go darker. And some of it will not. So we're going to go ahead and just put a little bit of color on here. For this, I got a little big, but at least you'll be able to see what I've done. So this is again the stem coming off. And this stem is huge, but that's okay. This is creating a water line where I did that last one. I was like, oh, I think I can get away with it. That's because this was drying out. So now we've got this. Now I can try to soften it now, but here's the deal. If I have a wet brush at all, I'm just going to have such an issue. So I'm pulling most of the water out. This is more than just a dry brush. This is, again, working with almost a thirsty brush. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to just wet and dampen it just enough so it can soften the line. This is called babysitting edges. Watercolors will do this all the time when they're working with stuff to keep, because right now we have all these water lines happening. And we don't want water lines. That's the enemy of the watercolorist. I just loaded this with some paint, but now I have to take it from the ferrule, take most of it back out, or again it's going to leave, it's going to bloom. And so I'm using just a little bit less than it's. There's again, if you haven't watched the classes, or the instructions, we're dealing with a dry brush here. No, not even a dry brush. We're dealing with a thirsty brush. Pardon me. So if I do that, well, then I can just deal with some of these edges just a little bit. You can't really do any great painting with it. Be careful. Don't get yourself into thinking, oh yeah, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make some great painting. No, you can just play with edges just a little bit. You might be able to coax, like I'm trying to play with the edge of this highlight right here. You can coax something out very, very lightly, but again, you have to be very careful when you do this because again, it's going to start to create textures. And right now, I don't want textures. I want it to seem like this smooth, lovely wash, not like a whole bunch of texture. This right here is like dry brushing. So once you get there, again, you don't want that because it's going to start to. You can't do a smooth. This isn't like painting with like oil or something. You can't get some nice transition unless you have water. Otherwise, it's just gonna skip over the surface and look like dry brushing, whether you want it to look like that or not. So what we're going to do is we're going to let this dry down a bit. We're going to come back and we're going to just finish this off fairly quickly. All right, so welcome back. So we're going to go ahead and work a little bit more on our pear. Now it's funny, I think I told you that normally I'd have this taped with regular tape. I thought this one, again, might, because it was 300 pound, even though it was in a block, I thought I might be able to get away with it. Obviously it's not, and you can see it's buckling. And I laugh to myself because I have students that come in here sometimes to try to tape stuff down like this. I'm like, it's just not going to hold. And of course, this is the same thing that's happening to me. I haven't done something, tried to pull something, try to do something like this since like college, and the first time you go, nope, it's not going to work. I thought I was going to be able to be smarter this time, but apparently didn't work this time either. Again, you normally will whenever I work on stretched paper, and that's where you wet the paper down, get some water-activated adhesive tape, you tape it out, and that stuff will hold the paper. In fact, it holds the paper so well that it actually will start to bend your board under the pressure of the stretch of the paper, and keeps the paper nice and flat. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to finish up some of this, our little pear. I think the biggest thing we're going to do is we're going to work back into the wall. So I'm going to use probably this one, maybe the 1/2 inch brush. Try that, and the 1 inch and the 10 inch. I'm going to mix up some of my color over here first. So I'm just going to go ahead and mix up that neutral. We had an orange, so we had yellow, and I'm using a yellow that's more orange and a red that's more orange, so that way we get the brightest orange. I've got some other videos that talk about why that would be about mixing color. So we start off with the brightest hue, and then we temper, or in other words, we then will take it and we will dull it. So I'm using a mixture of both, and there's tons of ways to do this. Now, I could do this. This is for the beginning students, so in the class. So we're going to use the easiest way possible. If I was in a little more advanced class, we'd be using complementary mixing of color. If I was in a little more advanced class, we'd be using this plus complementary plus using further apart colors on the color wheel, more open space colors, and or using mixing primaries from secondaries and some other different color concepts we can use to kind of ratchet it up to the next level, so to speak. But I'm going to go ahead and mix up just a couple of colors. This is for the cooler part of the wall. Now I think that's went too cold, so I need to warm it up. Now I don't want to warm it too much. I want to add some red, but I don't want to add too much of the red orange at this point. So I'm adding a little bit more of my alizarin crimson. I even added a little bit of the red violet. Well, now that's got a little bit of the red, but it's not. I needed it to still be a cooler red orange, which is what this is now. It's got just a little bit of the blue in there. So we'll take this. Then we're going to do one that's a little brighter. So we're going to take the red, and I think we'll take this. Now this is a yellow orange too, but it's since it's a brown, it's already going to lose some intensity as we lighten it. Now that's too red. So I'm going to take a little bit more of this yellow. Again, yellow. It's a yellow orange, and we're going to use that. And all right, so let's go ahead and use these values to wash back into this our wonderful little background. See how that's just pulling right out from under there. What we're going to do, I think, is we're going to pick up this board and we're going to bring it over here. I'm going to lay it on there so that just some of the pressure of the board will keep this a little flatter. It won't completely work, but it won't be bad either. It'll help save the day, so to speak. So again, we're going to come into here, which is what I was going to do before I was so rudely interrupted. I just had to deal with that. So we're going to darken this slightly. Now, this right here is a little bit too much. I'm not going to worry a ton about it at the moment because I need to wet all the paper. So I think I'm going to use a little bit more of this, tiny bit more of the blue, and bring that back in here. Now I've brought just a little bit more blue into the conversation, and it's going to help neutralize it a little bit. It'll just be nicer is all that is. So a little bit of this, a little bit of the blue coming into here, cool this down just a little bit. Warm and cool meaning orange and yellow and red are like fire, and then blue, purple, and green are more like ice. And so those are basic warm and cool relationships. Now warm and cool are much more, have a myriad of, like 3 levels of relationship with warm and cool. But when I'm talking about mixing color and I say, well, I'm going to cool it down, that usually means I'm going to be using something that's closer to the violets, the greens, the blues. If I'm warming it up, it's going to be something closer to the yellows, the oranges, and the reds. And so all that means. So just be aware of that. Sometimes people don't know that going in, and people can go, well, wait a minute, they're talking about a warm blue, but now he's talking about warming up a blue, and he's doing different stuff, and I'm not sure I understand how it works. It's just that there's different levels of warm and cool. It can be a little confusing when you first hear it. Once you get used to, oh, that's what they're talking about, well, it's no big deal. It's really not as overwhelming as it can seem. But sometimes in the beginning it can seem like double talk. You're like, what are they talking about? So again, I'm going to go ahead and just bring in some more. Now I got to be careful because that's too dark. Bring in some more water. Cut around here. Now I'm going to grab a different brush because otherwise I won't be able to cut in around that as well. Okay, now this is getting a little dark through here, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to pat some of that off. Try to help that out a little bit. Then I'm going to have to re-wet this area, otherwise I'll get a halfway dry spot in the middle of my painting, and I certainly don't want that. That would ruin everything. Alright, so had to re-wet this because this was starting to make a water line. And I may not be able to get part of that water line out. We'll see in a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and lighten this up a bit with a little water. Come into here with a little bit more of the warmth. This is the orange or yellow, hence the warmer sort of variation of this. And again, this is supposed to be the back of that wall. So it has to be dark enough for the white paper to look white. If it's not, well then I'm in trouble. You know, I also tried to keep a little more neutral. We can come over here because I think we need to oops. Got a little paint on there. We're going to try to clean this up a little bit. So bring a little more water in here. Probably too much on there, so I need to pull some of that off. So I dabbed it on the paper towel to take some of that back off of there. I'm then going to go ahead and grab my 1/2-inch brush. Again, we're just going to try to see if we can coax a little bit more. You know, always use the biggest brush you can possibly stand. It'll be better. You'll be able to control it and get a flatter wash as long as you have some water on there. If this starts to dry out, you're going to start dry brushing, and it will no longer flatten out. It'll be drier, and so it'll start to, start to get choppy, and it'll start picking up the texture of the paper. And instead of this nice wet wash, you'll have this texture-y sort of thing, which might be fine if you're dealing with a brick wall, but if you're doing like this smooth wall that's supposed to be just this ever soft transition of value, that's just going to be too much. That was too much water, and I'm going to get a bloom there. So I need to come on over here and very quickly work this in and work this up so I don't get that bloom. Okay, so now I'm getting a little bit more value through here. Now again, we're going to bring probably just a little, see if I can get, well, I've already done this a couple times. It's too wet. That's going to bloom. Take out more water, tap it on the paper towel. Now I've pulled off a little bit of a patch, but that won't be so bad that I think it's not going to ruin it. So we're going to go ahead and let this dry, and then we're going to come back in and we're going to finish off. Now I might be able to, maybe we'll do this too, because these two are separated, so they are not touching. And so what I'm going to do, I think I'll get a smaller brush, is I'm going to wet down. Now this is a little different technique, so we're going to wet this down, this whole thing down first. So I'm going to come in here with my water and my brush, and we're going to re-wet the entire area for the cast shadow. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and wet this down. And we're going to kind of work in the reverse. We're going to go from lighter washes to darker washes. Try to get this to look how I want. I think I'm going to need a bigger brush. We had a little bit of Payne's Gray, a little bit of blue, so we get a little bit of blue with the Payne's Gray. This is a cobalt blue, and that's a little dark, so we're going to start a little bit lighter. And I'm going to go ahead and bring out, and I may not even take it all the way out to where the water is, and so that we have this sort of bleed out softly. Well, maybe I pulled some of the paint out of my brush. I'm going to bring this in. Okay. And then we're going to make this, now this is the more, that has more paint in it. So now I'm going to drop this in. Okay. Okay. Lots of people are like, well, if this buckles, what are you going to do with it? Like, this is buckling all over the place. What you can do is you can wet the back of this and then stretch it with the paper tape. Or if you're all the way done with the paint, you're like, I don't want to stretch it with paper tape, but I still want a good stretch. It has to be, you can't do this with every paper. Like if it was 90 pound, you'd have to stretch it. Since this is like somewhere, this is around 140 is what this is acting like, even though it said it was 300, it's acting like a 140 pound paper. So if that's the case, we might be able to get away with where you put it, you'll wet down the back with a sponge, and then you put it between, a couple pieces of paper to protect it, and then put a couple heavy books on it. And again, if it's a stiff enough paper, it'll flatten it back down. If it's 140, and again, I've done that, and it didn't go all the way flat, you're going to have to stretch it. And again, what you do is you just stretch it with the paper, let it dry, and then cut it off. You can't get the paper back off without saturating it. So the paper would stay on at that point. You just cut the, and leave the tape on. And, it won't be any problem, and you'll have a nice flat, piece of watercolor paper. It will be wonderful. All right. Dip some more water, take some of the extra water off, bring this back in. So now we're dealing with a semi-wet brush, and we're going to go ahead on semi-wet paper and put that in. And again, if I don't cover the whole area, again, what you're going to be left with is, again, water lines. I've got some soft ones right here, but I'm not going to worry about those for now. We're going to let this sit. We're going to let this dry back off, and then we're going to come back in, and we're going to really try to finish this pear. Now I'm not going to try to take this to a photorealistic state. We're not trying to do that. That's not the point of this. This isn't to show you, oh, aren't I so great? This is to show you, okay, here's a basic way of working with it. We had 2 layers. Whenever you do 2 layers, again, you'll have a little bit more. We had a little more blue in here. It gets a little more vibration. It looks a little nicer. So don't be afraid to go over it again, but make sure that everything around it is completely dry. Now, some people will use a hair dryer because of that. If you use a hair dryer, it's going to lighten the paint as it dries. And sometimes it'll blow the paint around in a way you don't want it. But if you don't mind that, again, a hair dryer can be a way of drying this out much more quickly. I'm just going to go ahead and let it air dry. That way you don't get any of that, the things that, you don't get any blow marks happening, and it'll work fine. So I'll be back in a few, and we'll go ahead and finish this out. All right, we're back. So this is Kevin McCain again, and we're going to go ahead and finish this thing off. We're playing with the stem a little bit, putting a little bit of color in there. And now we're going to start to darken some of it. I'm using a semi-wet brush. I'm doing that on dry paper, or I'm using it on dry paper. And with watercolor, again, you can just continue to darken it up. Go ahead and continue to remember, with watercolor we build up for the dark, so we're going to go ahead and continue to build up the darks. And I'm just, again, pulling little bits of color that I'm using on this. A little bit of deeper red, a little burnt umber, a little bit of the red. We're trying to get a little bit of variation here in the color, so we're varying from a little redder to a little greener, a little darker to a little lighter, a little yellower to a little. So we're just, we're just adding a little bit of yellow to brown, and we're adding a little bit of gold, or not gold, but orange to brown. And I'm using some of these previous mixtures that we used for the yellows and the and the pear. And I'm using a little bit of, this is a red sienna, which is just a red brown. So if I didn't have a burnt sienna, you can use a medium red or a true red with a little bit of burnt umber, and you'll have the same color. So, there's like a lot of different ways to get, the same colors just by understanding the color wheel. We've just gone over a little bit of the color wheel, but again, the more you paint, the more you'll understand. The more you understand, the better you can use it, the more proficient you get at it. It's just like learning to play the piano. The more you practice, the better you get. It's the same thing with drawing and painting. So we're going to go ahead and call this done. I've got dark tones, I've got some medium tones and some light tones, and that'll be enough to indicate that we've got this little pear here. Okay. So the next thing we're going to try to do is we're going to try to clean this up. So this is basically our little painting. When you work in watercolor, you're going to sometimes get little things like this, which are water lines. There's this little edge right there that's, again, a little bit of a water line. And so we can soften this by coming in here and just with a little bit of moisture. Now this is not a super wet brush. This is barely a semi-wet brush. It's almost a dry brush. But we can go in here, we can lift some of that up to soften that edge just a bit as we work on it. Now it almost looks like a pencil line. It's not. It's again, it's a It's a water line, and we've got a few of these here. Now you got to be careful when you do this, because if you're not careful, you'll lift everything out to white. And sometimes, like I did a little bit over here. This softened the edge, but there's sort of a line going around it now. And the only way to get rid of that is I'm gonna have to kind of glaze in a wet wash over the whole shadow side, and that's fine as long as you're, you know, with watercolor. It's really a necessity if you're going to take your painting to the next level, as people like to use the term. Well, then you have to get used to playing a little bit with, you know, softening water lines and stuff like that. They're going to happen. No matter who you are, you're going to get water lines. And when you get them, you just go in, you take them out. Soften them up a bit. And if you do, your watercolor will have a much better feeling of being finished than if you don't do this. If you don't, it'll be like, oh, look, it's a watercolor, ha ha. And this will still look like a watercolor, but I'm just saying it'll feel a little bit more finished. Now, again, for those that haven't watercolored a lot, this can seem very strange. What I'm doing here is I'm picking up a little bit of paint, taking out some of the water. So I've got a little bit of water and a little bit of paint. Again, if you use just water, sometimes, depending on the color, because certain colors will lift. Other colors are dye colors, which means they're not going to lift at all. I can soften it, but you'll never be able to get them out. So you know, you learn to play with this a little bit, but you also learn what you know that you can't do, or what you can only soften, or what you can change a little bit and what you can change a lot. This is this dark top of the pear up here. In other words, the pear gets a little bit more of a golden brown sort of color, and it's an orange brown. So again, I've said all browns have color, and so this would be an orange brown in terms of the color. And so we just want to give a nod again to what's happening up there. Like so. So again, we just put a little bit of the color up there. Again, give a nod to the fact that it's getting a little darker up here on that pear because of the pigmentation change that's happening up there as well. Like so. You also will use, sometimes you'll get these white lines, and again, because you didn't quite touch the two edges together. So you can come in, I've just got a little bit of paint and very little water on my brush. Again, pretty much it's close to a dry brush. And I can just come in there and very quickly take those down. I have just pure water now. I'm going to see if I can soften that up on this side. And again, this will start to help this feel better and better. Again, we've got a little bit of the same thing going on. Now, what I would do on this, once I've got these addressed, what we would do is I would do a whole wash over this whole thing again, just to kind of bring some of this back together to help it. Pull together, as some people would say. Not a bad idea. We can certainly do that. Now I've got a thing over here that looks like the ring, and that's because, or a ring of something, and that's because there's a little divot in here, and then there's two ridges that are catching a highlight, and so we try to, maybe I'll lighten this first. So maybe we'll take some water. Like so. And then what I can do, there's a bit of middle value that comes around here, and then it goes into this area right here. Okay, so this is the ferrule. This is this impression here on the pear. I don't know what I was thinking of a term, but obviously didn't make sense what I said, so I can't remember what the term was I was trying to think of. But anyways, comes in there. This should actually be a little lighter over here, so let's see if we can pull some of this side out a bit. Not enough water, I don't think. Bring a little more water in there. Soften that up. Now again, also some of this got to be a little too, needs to darken just a scotch. It's just too light. Losing some of the subtlety. So I'm going to extend this down a little bit. Otherwise we're just going to get all kinds of water lines. So I'm going to go ahead and just bring this on down. Like so. Now so again, we're just trying to get some of the form shadows on here to be right. I probably need to bring this over into the shadow area a little bit. If I don't, well then it's gonna feel flat again. So we're gonna create water lines, and they are your enemy in watercolor. Now, if I was doing some technique thing where I was leaving them and I was trying to make it obvious that it was part of the technique, well then maybe not. But most times, you know, again, people aren't doing that. They're like, oh, waterline, I didn't mean to do that. Yeah, that's a problem. If you're like, oh, that's a waterline, that's lovely, that's just what I wanted. Well, maybe not so much. But that's usually not what people are saying when the waterlines start to happen. They're like, man, that was so pretty. What happened? Why is that waterline there? So all right, see if we can pull a little bit of this. Maybe that's not going to be enough. So this again, you would wait till the very end to do something like this. We're going to see if we can pull some out with our paper towel. I'm kind of twisting this to make a little, kind of like a little, almost like a tip of a pencil or something, because we're going to use this to sort of draw with. And I'm trying to see if I can pull back out just a bit. And again, you don't want to do this to the very end, because the moment you start doing this, you are being very aggressive with that paper, and you're actually, somebody might say, overworking it a bit. Again, if I can, do it towards the end and do it just a little bit, then I'll be fine. So I've kind of scrubbed it just a little bit, took a little bit of that off, but it's not so bad where it's like, oh no, I ruined it. And so that's you got to be careful with this, because again, this is paper, it's wet paper, and you don't want it to come off. Now, some people will use little sponges and sea sponges and stuff like that, and some of those can be very effective. But you have to make sure they're really clean if you're going to try to use it like that. If it's not super clean, oh, it's going to be a mess. So you're going to dirty everything up. So that's why I use paper towels. It's always clean. I can throw the paper towel away, and then I can use it again next time. I don't have to worry is everything out of here? Is there something that's going to transfer from that sponge that I don't want on here? And so I don't use sponges very often, except in very specific circumstances. I prefer to use the paper towel. And again, I think we can go ahead and leave this alone. This is sort of the last little thing. There's a water edge right there, but we're to a point where I can't play with that very much. Well, we can see if we can do some dry brushing. Let's see if we can get away with that. You got to be careful of this, because if you don't, this will be like little dots right there along that line that I do not want. This is a dry brush. Now, for those taking the class, again, remember a dry brush is where we've tapped it about 8 times, or in this case, there wasn't much water. I tapped most of the water out, and then there was just enough water to dissolve the paint. And so I can, that's again that's a dry brush, and so that's what I've got here is this dry brush that I'm using to try to take out that little water line. Now there's a little bit, I'd play a little bit because again we got some strangeness going on here with the cast shadow, where we got some water lines. I could get in there and rub them a little bit, probably get my wet paper towel, rub that a little bit, and by doing that you can take that out, soften it. There's just a lot of things that you can do. Again, this is buckled unfortunately, so I'm trying to kind of straighten this out so you can see it. But this is what we want to do. We want to try to paint this pear. Go ahead and try that. Give it your best shot. Again, I was mostly just using yellows, and I was mixing the yellows with either burnt umber, and a lot of times I was using the Payne's gray as well because we needed a little green in here. That right there is causing a water line, so I'm going to have to come back later, and I can tell I've lost my bleed. I'll have to come back here later with some paint and try to repaint this whole thing, see if I can soften that line. I can't do it now. I have to leave it alone. If I don't leave it alone, boy, am I going to wish I had. So we're not doing that. But we were using Payne's gray and the brown, sometimes just the brown, sometimes a little more Payne's gray with our different yellows. Lemon yellow, which is a little more green, and this one's a little more orange. Sometimes we're using this is our raw umber, which is an orange. Used that a few times in here while we were painting that pear. And that's how we get some that are a little bit more golden, some are a little bit more lemony and green. This has a little bit of brown into it, so it's darker. It has a little bit of orange to it, but it's also darker. This is a little bit lighter. You're getting some nuance in there, and that's what we want. So go ahead and give this a try for those that are in the class. And I could play with this more, but we're not going to. We're not going to try to. I could put 2 or 3 hours in on this thing and try to really bring it into a really nice finish. But I think for the most part, since you guys at the beginning, for those in the beginning class, if you can get it to this point, I'm going to be ecstatic. I'm going to be super excited. But anyways, if you're unsure about any of this that we've done here, roll the video back, sit down and paint and watch it, see what I've done with the color and stuff. But yeah, give it a shot. So this has been Kevin McCain with Kevin McCain Studios and Idaho Art Classes. You guys be more creative out there. All right, take care now. Bye-bye.